My husband called me worthless at his family's Thanksgiving dinner. He didn't know I owned the house. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 32 years old, and I was standing in the foyer of my own house, watching 4 sheriff's deputies walk past my husband's family like they were furniture, when I finally understood something. My family had spent 5 years underestimating me. That night, they found out exactly how expensive that mistake was going to be. Welcome back to Cherry Revenge Tales. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from tonight. And if you believe in calm, quiet justice, the kind that doesn't need to raise its voice. Now let me take you back to 1 week earlier, to the night this all started. It was Thanksgiving, and I was hosting. That detail matters, because you need to understand that the house, the beautiful colonial on Ashford Lane with the wraparound porch, and the kitchen my husband Daniel loved to show off to his coworkers, was mine. I'd bought it 2 years before I ever met Daniel, back when I sold the small software consulting firm I'd built out of my apartment. Daniel knew the broad strokes. He didn't know the deed. He'd simply never asked, and I'd never volunteered it, because in 5 years of marriage, it had genuinely never once occurred to me that ownership would become a weapon someone might try to use against me. The table was set for 12. Daniel's mother, Patricia, arrived first, sweeping through my front door in a mink stole she wore every year regardless of temperature, already narrating her own entrance. "Well, don't we look festive?" she said, glancing at my centerpiece like she was appraising it for a garage sale. Daniel's sister Vanessa came next, trailing her husband Mark, a man who worked in commercial real estate and reminded everyone of it within 90 seconds of any conversation. I smiled and passed the cranberry sauce. I've always been good at that, smiling while other people perform their lives at me. Then Patricia turned to me, mid-bite, with the particular smile she used when she was about to say something cruel and call it honesty. "So Claire," she said, "any news on your little consulting thing? Daniel mentioned you're still doing that from home." She said from home the way other people say from prison. "It's going well," I said. "Actually, I've learned that arguing with people who've already decided who you are just gives them more material." I kept eating, I kept smiling, and I felt Daniel, beside me, say nothing at all, not a word in my defense. He never did. That should have been the whole evening. It wasn't. After dinner, when the plates were cleared and the wine had loosened everyone's filters, Patricia set down her glass and looked at Daniel like she was cueing him. He cleared his throat. "So Claire," he said, "we've actually been talking, as a family, and we think it's time we discussed the house. Mark's been saying property values on this street are climbing," Daniel said, glancing at Mark for backup, who nodded like a man confirming a stock tip. "And honestly, with the market the way it is, this place is worth a lot more than what we're using it for. Mom thinks, we all think, it makes sense to sell. Downsize, take the equity, and actually invest it. In something real." "Something real," I repeated. "Daniel means in the business," Patricia said smoothly. "Mark's expansion. The lake property next door came up, and it's a real opportunity." Every single person looking at me like this was already decided, like I was simply the last signature required on a form that had already been filed. "This is my house," I said quietly. "It's a formality, Claire," Mark added, leaning back in his chair with the easy confidence of a man who had never once been told no by a woman at a dinner table. "Married couples restructure assets all the time. It's actually smart, from a tax perspective. You'd thank us in a year. Unless you don't actually see yourself as part of this family." "I bought this house before I met Daniel," I said. My voice didn't rise. "I want you to understand that. It never rose. Not once that entire evening. The deed has one name on it. Mine." The table went quiet for exactly 1 second before Patricia's mask fully came off. "Don't be dramatic," she snapped. "You've contributed nothing to this family that matters, Claire. You sit in that home office doing whatever it is you do, while Daniel actually provides. The least you could do is not stand in the way of real opportunity. Frankly, you should be grateful anyone in this family. Yours means nothing." I sat with that sentence for a moment. Worthless. That's what she meant, even if she'd dressed it in nicer words. I felt something settle in me. Not anger. Something colder and more useful than anger. I reached up and pressed the side button on my smartwatch twice, activating the voice memo app I'd quietly set up that morning, the one Daniel didn't know existed. I'd learned, over the last few months, to always be ready. I'd learned that from the emails. I think, I said, standing up, we should finish this conversation another time. I began clearing plates, calm as still water, while behind me, the table erupted into a symphony of outrage. Patricia calling me cold, Vanessa calling me selfish, Mark muttering something about typical, Daniel saying my name like a warning. I didn't turn around, I just kept clearing plates. Here's what none of them knew. 3 weeks earlier, I'd found something. Daniel had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter, and an email notification had populated across the screen. From Mark, subject line, refi numbers, don't tell Claire yet. I hadn't gone looking for it. Patricia, calling me. Daniel and Mark had been quietly drafting paperwork to refinance a property using my house as collateral, forging the appearance of joint ownership through a manufactured, home equity partnership document that a lawyer friend of Mark's had drafted, one that, if I'd been careless enough to sign anything at that dinner, could have opened a legal door they intended to walk straight through. I hadn't confronted Daniel that night. Instead, I'd done something quieter and considerably more effective. I'd called my own attorney. Together we'd filed a formal notice with the county recorder, confirming sole ownership and flagging the property against any fraudulent instrument. I'd also, at Renata's suggestion, forwarded copies of that email chain, the one Daniel didn't know I'd seen, to her office, time-stamped and preserved. I made his coffee in the mornings and said very little, and I think that unsettled him more than shouting ever could have. Patricia called twice, leaving voicemails that oscillated between saccharine and venomous, at one point actually saying, "You'll regret making this family your enemy, Claire. We know people. We have lawyers." I saved every voicemail. I also spent those days doing something I should have done years earlier, going back through old emails, old bank statements, old conversations I'd brushed off as harmless family teasing. A pattern emerged the way patterns do, once you finally let yourself see them. Offhand remarks from Patricia at holidays about how houses were meant to stay in the family name, which I now understood had never meant my name at all. I wasn't angry as I read through it. I was simply cataloging. Renata always said that the calmest clients made the strongest cases, and I intended to be very, very calm. The following Saturday, Daniel told me we were meeting Mark and a financial advisor for brunch at the country club, to finally sort things out like adults. I said that sounded fine. I wore my watch. The club dining room was full that morning, servers moving between white tablecloths, a low hum of conversation from a dozen other tables, the kind of public setting where people like Patricia believed they had the upper hand, because surely I wouldn't make a scene somewhere so visible. Mark had brought a folder. Patricia had brought her lawyer, a thin, nervous man named Whitfield who kept glancing at his watch like he had somewhere better to be. I understood the message. This was meant to be an ambush, timed and dressed up as civility, designed to pressure me into signing something before dessert arrived. Whitfield slid a document across the table. It simply formalizes what's already understood within the family. There's nothing understood, I said. I never agreed to anything. Claire, Daniel said, low and tight, just sign it, please. For once, just make this easy. I didn't reach for the pen. Instead, I reached for my phone, and I said calmly, before anyone signs anything, I think we should have someone else look at this. I glanced at my watch. 10:14. Renata had told me she'd have someone at the club by 10:30, if I texted the signal, and the clock in that room felt, for the first time all morning, like it was working for me instead of against me. At 10:29, a man in a gray suit approached our table, flanked by a county recorder's office representative, and, quietly, a uniformed officer, standing a respectful few feet back near the entrance, procedural, unhurried, there because fraud against a property title is, in fact, a criminal matter, not a family disagreement. Mrs. Bennett, the man said, addressing me, not Daniel. We received your attorney's filing. I have some questions for the parties who drafted this refinancing document. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply laid a folder on the table, copies of the email chain, the falsified partnership draft, the notarization attempt that had never gone through because I'd blocked it at the county level weeks earlier, and asked Mark, plainly, whether he could explain the discrepancy between the ownership listed on this document and the ownership on public record. I watched Patricia's face first. It went the color of the tablecloth. Whitfield began stammering about miscommunication and preliminary drafts, reaching for his briefcase like he could physically retract the last 10 minutes. Mark's hands started shaking so badly he knocked over his water glass, and the sound of it hitting the floor seemed to echo across the entire dining room. Vanessa, who'd arrived halfway through, rounded on her own husband in front of everyone. "You told me this was already approved, Mark. You told me it was fine," her voice climbing into something shrill and public, exactly the kind of scene Patricia had been so certain I would never dare to cause. Daniel just stared at me. "You knew," he said. "You knew this whole time." "I did," I said. "Why didn't you say something?" "I did," I said again. "I said it was my house." Nobody at that table wanted to hear it. The county representative asked Mark and Whitfield to step aside to answer further questions about the drafted document, and I watched two grown men who had spent a decade condescending to me shrink into folding chairs at the edge of the patio, suddenly very interested in the pattern of the tile floor. Patricia found her voice last, and when she did, it cracked. "Claire, please, we're family. Can't we just—" "You told me I was worthless at my own dinner table," I said, quiet enough that only our table could hear it. I stood, smoothed my coat, and walked out of the club into the cold November air, leaving all of them at that table, with their folder and their silence, and the sound of a water glass still rolling, somewhere behind me, off the edge. Here's what I've learned, and what I hope you carry with you if any of this sounded familiar. Being underestimated is not a weakness. It's information. It tells you exactly how much your composure is worth, and exactly how much someone else's cruelty depends on your silence. You don't owe anyone an explosion to prove your strength. If someone in your life has decided your worth is small enough to ignore, let them believe it right up until the moment the paperwork says otherwise. Protect what's yours, in writing, before you ever need to, and never confuse someone's volume for their power. Thank you so much for watching Cherry Revenge Tales tonight. If this story meant something to you, please like the video and subscribe for more. And if you haven't already, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're watching from.